Hey there everybody, welcome to the Secret History Living in Your Aquarium, and today in this video we're going to be talking about some of my favorite tips and tricks for cutting down the size of your aquarium plants. So say you've just got a jungle, a rat's nest of plants like this, and you need to trim it back, or maybe you have a more conservative tank like this one over here. But either way, this is tips and tricks for trimming different kinds of plants, be it Anubias and rhizome plants like the ones up here, or free-floating plants, the plants that have kind of gone feral up here that are floating plants, or the complex stem plants that oftentimes turn into knots full of roots and different nodes. And we're going to talk about just exactly how you can trim these up. Another little tip that we'll throw in there will be how to deal with the variegated or white varieties of plants if you want to keep them looking good and not looking like this, like garbage. So stay tuned and we'll jump right into this. Hey guys, really quick, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Alex Williamson with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium, and I just wanted to tell you really quick a little bit about my background so you're not wondering who's this guy just hacking at these plants. So I am an aquascaper. I have been in the hobby for almost a decade now. Probably shouldn't count the first few years, but I've also been in a number of aquascaping contests, come in first place in 3 of them, and I hold an annual aquascaping contest, as well as have this channel, obviously, which you either know of or you've stumbled upon. And I'm quite familiar and collect plants, quite familiar with a lot of them. Have probably had about 200 to 300 species in my care, and right now I currently have about 160, 170 species in my house in all my tanks put together. So I've held them in high tech, low tech, no tech, whatever you want to call it, indoor and outdoor, and highlight, low light, CO2, EI or estimative index dosing, and also just letting them be. Now this tank I felt was a good representation of all my tanks because it is, some of the plants are what you'd consider high tech or that need highlight and CO2 to look their best, as well as ferts, but not all of them, and all of them can exist and thrive without it. So I feel like everything we're going to go over will be something that any tank, any person might have, could come in contact with it. So hopefully this will be helpful to all of you to some degree or another. So let's go back inside. It's cold out here tonight, and we will get going. I just wanted to put a face to the disembodied voice that will be talking during this thing. So see you inside. Alright everybody, I want to explain what it is that I did here in order to basically take down the tank from being all like this. I mean, it was just a maze of plants to getting it more sparse. So the main thing you do is you take scissors. There's all sorts of fancy ones you can get. You can also just use your thumbnail. I like to use this this way. I mean, so what you're basically wanting to do is the first step to taking down the massive cluster of plants is you take the crowns and you look for if they have any splits. So if they have a spot where a bunch of branches are coming off of one spot, like right here, there's all these coming off, these 3 heads coming off right down here. I like to break it off right below that usually, and you'll end up with something like this. And you have a choice to make here, and it depends on what you want to do. So the neat part about this little trick is that you've already got the beautiful color, because these plants have grown for weeks or months, and you've already got the beautiful color that normally you just have at the top of the plant. And if you replant those tops like I have here, with all this hygrophila and bacopa, you can actually get it to get darker and darker to the point where it is much darker than you'd ever see it growing in a tank usually. You can get it to be the colors it would be in a natural environment. So when you take these crowns and you have a split like this, each of these splits is from where I've trimmed it in the past. So you have a choice to make, which is you can then plant this and have a very dense grouping, which is how I got to this level of density in the first place. Or you can clip off a few of them, or even all of them, and deciding on where you want to do that. So if I break it off here with my thumb, you could also trim it. Some plants you definitely want to trim because pinching them will just damage it if it has a thick stalk. But then now we have this short stub that's going to be left right here. And this little stub will still continue to grow, but it will usually, on most stem plant species, it will split into two. So we'll get an even denser plant. So it gets denser and denser. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of transferring to a Dutch style of planting. And so you just take that piece and you can bury even some of the actual stems. They'll make their way to the top, but I just plant that down in the dirt and we're good to go. And I've done this already with a few of these Ludwigia ex lacustris or cross lacustris. And so that's just the basic of how you're going to do this. Now you can do it one stem at a time too, if you've just been growing them this way. And then over time, as you want to get it denser, if you do want to get it denser, you can just keep doing that. But then you can plant them very close to each other and get the most out of your plants. This is a really good time to also use any root tabs you want to include, or to include any bulbs that you want to include. These will usually take a month, 2 months to sprout and start noticing them, but they will need quite a bit of room. So if you're doing that, or you're planting something like a sword plant, like one of these, like an ocelot sword or a Prince Kleiner sword, you're going to want to give it plenty of room because it's going to shade all these plants out anyways. Now the same is true of these Logonandra carolensis, Logonandra meboldi species, and I wanted to give them a little bit of breathing room. Now this is a pretty powerful light that we have here, so this is a Twin Star SA 900, so we definitely wanted to still leave a little bit of shade on the sides so that there could be less damage to the plants, less diatomaceous algae growing on them, because I've got plecos in here that, as well as shrimp and other fish, that will constantly clean these. And when they do that too much, plants that have leaves that last a long time will start to get really dingy looking, even if they're super healthy. So I also recommend going in, and you can use your thumb, but this is where, or your whatever fingernail works best for you, but this is where your maintenance will pay off big time with mosses. Here's some subwassertong that's also being grafted onto this wood, and I haven't done anything to tie it on there. It's literally just been packed underneath plants. So the whole way I do this now, instead of using super glue or string, is I just put wood sandwiched together, like one piece here, another piece here, and then I slip plants in between and let them graft on over 2 or 3 months naturally. Now, you've also got vine plants and runner plants, like this Hydrocotyl verticillata, and this is one where you can break it anywhere and rebury this horizontal piece. Now these can come up out of the water and grow like little lily pads. This one's actually dying. It hasn't gotten enough light. And so it's a good time to take a look at your plants and see what's been hidden so much by light that it hasn't grown, and to just cut that off with scissors or your fingernail or whatever. So that will keep plants also like Bulbitis hedulata and water sprite and other things. That'll keep them looking good. Now, the other thing you'll see with chaining plants and vine plants, chainsword and valsenaria, corkscrew val, those kind of things, is you'll find that they send this runner underground or across the water. So you can also just float it. And this one's been floating for a while, so much to the point that these actually came up out of the water, and they're melting because now they're back in the water. But any place where I have roots showing, that's an easy spot to actually replant it. So I can take this big long chain if I don't want, I mean, look how long this thing is. It just goes and goes and goes. So what I can do is I can actually take this and look for a node or two nodes, and anywhere where it has roots, it doesn't actually need, on these chaining plants, it doesn't need exposure to the light. Now this plant is so hardy that it actually would be better to cut it with scissors, but I'm doing this one-handed. So but you see how I kind of just damaged it and smushed that plant. Sometimes you want to do this trauma to a plant. See how I always push it at an angle, I always cut it at a diagonal. That will encourage the plant to put more of the cells. So each of these nodes have undifferentiated cells. Everywhere a plant branches off, or where a branch starts, or twigs start, or where roots start, wherever there's a transformation in type of tissue, you will get undifferentiated cells. And that's the best place to trim, is right next to that, because either it will give you 2 forks or 3 forks depending on the plant, or it will continue in a chain, but you'll be able to grow it. So with this having 2, I could even cut this again, but it needs some of the sugars and carbs and starch that is in it, and this whole stem acts as a tuber or a root. So now I can actually take this, see how these other ones are popping up? All I did was I buried a piece of it horizontally. So I just bury it like this, sink it with both fingers, cover it back up, and eventually it's going to sprout. It'll orient itself. So that's one fun thing to do. The other thing you can do is you can, if you have plants that have just gotten super wild, out of control, which I've kind of waited to show this on this tank, is, so this is a Hygrophila polysperma, or rosevig as it's sometimes known. And what happens is, I'll break a little piece off here, you actually get these runners when it doesn't have enough light or nutrients. It could be one or the other. It could be that it doesn't have enough light, and so it's trying to use nutrients to make up for it, or it could be that it has so much light that it needs more nutrients to keep up with the pace of growth. But when this happens, it's a good sign that your plant is actually getting stunted. And so you can then cut off these roots if you want, and sometimes replant it, and it will stay one of the smaller plants. It'll stay a little stunted for a while. So that's another little tip that I like to have if you want to kind of use the same plant, but you want to see that one stays more carpeted or low. These are all stem plants, but I've planted the crowns, and so they'll grow that way. Now, another issue that a lot of people come into is if you have any Sawassertang, this water ferns or pellias, there's different kinds, as well as mosses, and they'll commonly grow all throughout the undergrowth, and it can get really tangled. It only takes a piece this size of moss, to float off and start its own colony. So over time, you'll end up with a bunch of these. The other thing to look in the undergrowth for is these tattered pieces. So like this is my Aponogeton crispus, and even though it's doing really well now and all acclimated, the other leaves look really good, it has enough leaves that as long as it's got 3, probably 3 is a good rule, leaves on it that are good, I'm going to take this off, because this is still growing and using light for photosynthesis, but it's not doing a super... Okay, so I also wanted to cover a couple other plant situations that are common in aquaria and in the planted tank world. One is floating plants, like, this sort of thing. Wisteria, water sprite, hornwort, kabamba, all these plants can be floating plants. They're such low light lovers and low nutrients lovers that they can be low light. So if they are high nutrient and low light, they will grow very dense. They'll get very thick like this, whereas they will be long and weedy if they have light, but not the right amount of nutrients. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do with that. Now, the other thing I like to do is sometimes if I have a plant like this one here, this just happens to be Nasea triflora, and it turns black very easily when it's been damaged. And this piece here has already almost broken off. And so I could let it break off and it'll probably grow a new node, but because this plant is known to be finicky, and instead of getting little dark green spots or yellow spots, it actually gets jet black, I like to float it at the top. So another thing, if you have a strong light, is you can use the margins to float your plants, and what they'll do is they'll send out those little white runners for nutrients instead of roots. So just like that piece that we had of the hygrophila that came off of this that had those white root runners coming off of it, that can have it. So it's all about reading your plants and understanding what they need. You know, you can grow them squat and dense if they have really high light and really high fertilizer, because they don't need to reach for anything. But if you put them in medium light or low light and they like high light, they're going to reach for that light. They're going to want the higher light, and so they're going to reach out, and there'll be longer distances between the nodes and the differentiated tissue that we were just talking about. The same is true of tissue cultures and things. Now, the other thing that you can do while you're maintaining your tank is you can look for leaves that are just covered in algae. Even a tank like this, I end up with a lot of leaves that are browning or split. And a lot of times I just follow them as low as I can to the base, break them off, and just throw them away, because they're just kind of sucking energy. They're just sapping the energy from the plant. So it's good to take care of these. It's kind of like deadheading a tree or a bush, or a rose bush, like pruning would be. And it diverts the energy to the most useful and colorful parts of the plant when you do that. Now, another thing, before we get to the little secret about albino plants, or rather white or pinto, whatever you want to call them, like the Anubias that we have, is I want to talk about how plants get leggy. So when this is just like the light situation, when they all start competing, they'll start to grow quickly in the stem and not produce leaf tissue. They're not focused on photosynthesis, they're focused on storing carb and different minerals, carbohydrates, sugar, and different minerals, starches from the substrate. And as long as you've got the nutrients down there, they're going to grow up, and then whenever they crest the top and have enough light for whatever species they are, so if they're low light, they might be fine here. Like this is a lower light rotala, whereas these like highlight, and they're going to grow all the way up to that point. So again, if you see any spots where snails or your algae eating fish have just picked away too much at the plants, or even like guppies and mollies or swordtails can end up being too aggressive with this. So I like to pick those off and just kind of do a little bit of upkeep. Now, I'm seeing some yellow down here, and if I hadn't known that this was shaded, I would assume that it either has too low of nitrates or potassium. But there's a lot of handy guides online that you can take a look at. And with Anubias, another good rule is if you bend it backwards against the grain of the main stem and it just breaks right off like this did, then it's an old leaf. These carnivorous plecos, these leopard frog plecos, they like to hang out under there too. So also just be aware that you don't smush anyone. That's just kind of common sense, I would assume. But I like to pick off the leaves that are probably a year old or 6 months old. Anubias won't drop its leaves naturally very well. And same with bulbitis and things. And so sometimes it can get really old and gnarly looking and look like the plant's not doing well, like this. It can look ratty. Whereas if you follow the base of it, the plant, this is Bulbitis hedulata, the large variety. But if you go to the base of it, what you should find are the little fiddleheads, or basically at the rhizome, you'll find little curlicue spirals, and that's your sign that your ferns are growing well. It's also a good time to take a look at your rhizome plants and see what they've been doing. So what they've been doing is trying to get nutrients, and you can see that they've been growing all those runners from the main tuber. So the main tuber is the backpacker food source, and you can see that this has actually rotted because it didn't have any light coming in, and it may have a nutrient deficiency even too, but this main one rotted. And when this happens, sometimes you kind of need to start over, and you need to just kind of gently feel the leaves. But if you pull on it with just a little bit of pressure and it falls off like that, those leaves are not getting good nutrients anyways. And sometimes algae can get in the way and start doing that, or even just rot from too much darkness, or from the algae taking over and the plant's not able to breathe in CO2 and oxygen in and out. It's not able to get its nutrients well. And you can see with the length of these, it didn't get its nutrients that it should have gotten, or it needed more. And so it was getting enough light, even though it was under the underbrush, yet there was stuff piled on top of it. And so the stuff piled on top of it weakened these leaves, allowed stuff to grow on it, like algae or even probably fungi in there too. And that's when you get these rotten bases. And so just take care of those, leave the main tuber. And my main strategy is use your thumbnail or a little very fine razor blade and just press it 1 to 3 times into there, and you'll get new growth usually right where you did that. And that's because, see how that broke off there, that piece again? It broke off the main tuber, and these pieces are still good. They're still springy and spry and light green, but all that stuff that has growth on it is questionable. And if you want to be overly cautious, over trimming is rarely a problem in the plant world. So you can always just pop that off at the tuber, and you see there it was already rotten inside, so it wasn't getting anything new. This leaf is basically just so rigid that it's been staying there, but it's just a home for algae to take over, and that algae can then spread. So we want it to look good and crisp and nice and new. And you can see this Fraser eye is doing really good, looks good. This leaf's pretty old, but it still looks good. This Cophifolia, the leaves getting old, and oftentimes you'll get a little bit of algae on the sides like this, and that's just because of the age of the leaf. Doesn't mean that I have too much algae anywhere in the tank really usually, but you can take hydrogen peroxide and the 3% kind usually, like this, and load it into a hypodermic needle, a little syringe, or a little like cough syrup syringe that kids take medicine with, and just spot treat that right in the water. And the way hydrogen peroxide breaks down H2O2, the chemical, is it turns into 2 oxygen, which is atmospheric oxygen, and 2 hydrogen, which then can be bonded, broken up into single hydrogen, and it just basically becomes water and oxygen. So that's what the bubbles coming off are. It's nothing sinister. And so it's a really pretty safe way to treat things, is spot treating. So I like to look for other things like this. This is just a pattern of where it's been nibbled on, and I'm going to break that off just because that means that there had been algae on there, and my little cleanup crew guys are doing a good job of helping, but they're just over the months getting a little too into it, and it wears down the actual leaf. Now, the last little thing I wanted to talk about in this video is if you have the rare types of plants where you get the albino varieties, or sometimes it's called Anubius pinto, or Anubius variegated, or snow white. There's lots of different names for it. Also, while we're flipping through here, this is red root floater, and it is a good indicator to me of nitrates. So when the roots are super red like this, it usually means that the nitrates are pretty low. It does need a little bit of iron, but it's not one where iron is not the secret to the redness in most plants, honestly. It's usually lower nitrate, amounts of nitrate, that is, and good light exposure will get you that redness. It just needs that high light. And again, where did that plant go? I was just holding it. Ran into the Nicea trifolia, and stargrass is another one of the odd ones that will actually turn black like this. It's nothing bad going on in the plant, but it's just a plant that looks real bad real quick. If there's enough iron in your water, sometimes it'll turn more of a rusty red, but it usually turns black on the ends where you snip it, like this on the bottom. And you can see I snipped it at an angle, and what happened? All these little root runners came out and started reaching for nutrients. Now on Anubias, there are two kinds of runners that come out of the tuber, or the main starchy energy reserve, the storage reserve of nutrients, and that is the flat kind. So if you feel them, you can feel some are flat and some are round. Now the round kind are quote unquote the nutrient or the sapling sucking roots, whereas the flat kind are more like a taproot, or kind of they hold the plant down, and so those will run long and they'll be stringy, and what they're trying to do is find something to hold on to. So that's what's holding on to these pieces of wood so well. So when we get to this snow white Anubias that I wanted to talk about, this one is pinto, so it's not supposed to be fully snow white. But see, here we have another one where it had been submerged and just didn't get enough light. And so since it didn't get enough light, even though it's super old, it only has the flat types of stems on it. So we can cut all those back if we want. They're just for holding on to something. It's been floating so long, and underneath the surface of these other floating plants, as well as mats of things like hornwort and the bigger leaves, that it's now run its course and gotten in trouble. Now, the way these plants work is pretty interesting, in that usually they're hermaphrodites or chimeras, and it kind of depends in the plant world, but most are. The basic thing that you need to know, since it's not the same as with animals, is that the leaf is either green or it's white or half white, or the veins are white. And on the same plant, you get two types. So you'll see that the leaves are either green or they're quote-unquote white. This one's not getting the nutrients and light, more specifically, that it needs. So the white leaves are starting to decay. And so if they've decayed enough, or if they have enough, these ones just have algae on them, come to think of it, come to feel it. And sometimes you can kind of scrape that off of Anubias just very gently, but most of the time that's going to end up damaging the Anubias. So what you want to do is trim off all these flat roots that are holding on to things, or trying to, and then the roots that are coming out, like that are substantial, like this one here, that is going to try to be getting energy. And so those ones you can keep, or you can trim them back a little bit, but you'll usually see the little corkscrewy things on the ones that are trying to hold on to stuff. And those really, they don't do anything crucial other than hold the plant in place, because these plants are rhizome plants and they live off of other things. They're epiphytic or parasitic. These ones aren't parasitic because they don't actually take any nutrients from the plants they're with, but or the substance they're on. But so when we do this, the thing you have to realize is this plant still needs to get sunlight for photosynthesis. And even though the plant looks kind of white under here, it needs a balance of white and green. So even if the leaves are half white and green, or if they're speckled white and green, that is a plant that does not have enough chlorophyll in that leaf. So what you need to do is take care of the other part of the plant. A lot of times you'll see in tissue cultures that they've just grafted the plant or just cut the plant rather, same thing, that is white, and it will not survive. So it's really a shame that they sell those things when they're pure white. They really do need a green leaf somewhere. And see this leaf, it's a goner. It didn't get enough light. It was a white leaf. It has algae on it. So again, I'm taking it to the base, and then I'm going to break it off and dispose of it. Now another thing is, you don't want to just put these leaves back into your tank. They're not the same as dry leaves. A big enough tank and big enough ecosystem, which honestly this is, it will break down into mulm. And if you have enough snails and shrimp and things, specifically microorganisms and little teeny critters, they'll break it down, and then it's all good. It's just plant food in the future. The minerals and nutrients return to the ecosystem. But if you don't have a big enough tank and you don't have that full ecosystem that's balanced with little critters that can break it down and all the right bacteria and fungi even to do that, then you really want to pull it out of the tank, because it's just going to spike your organic, your diffused organics. So like this needs lots of care here. This all needs to be trimmed on here. It's all been hidden under light. That startled me. All the cochuse came running over my hands. But so the main thing you want to do to care for these, again, you get rid of the spongy, soggy parts if it's been hiding somewhere. Same with bucephalandras. And then basically you want to let the green part get as much light as possible. You can even float it like that. Sometimes it's a little more prone to algae if you do that, so if you have a strong enough light, it's actually more ideal to sink it a little bit, like this. And these, like I said, are just there to grab on. The thicker ones that are round are the ones that are sucking up the nutrients from the water. So I hope this has been a tutorial that served you pretty well. If you're trimming any sort of sword plants, that's kind of the last kind we didn't touch on, or rosette plants, the thing you want to do is pull from the outside of the cluster. Like if it were an onion, you'd peel away the bad leaves. And if there's a central leaf that's bad, you can always go close to the center and then pull it away. And these are kind of a hybrid of a tuber and a rosette. Almost, they're similar to crypts, like a logonandra here. And so you can go down to the bottom and you can either just literally wedge it, and it'll usually break away if it's on the outside. But if it's on the inside, don't do that. It'll split the plant and cause it trauma. And some plants are able to recover from trauma and actually are encouraged by trauma. In fact, most stem plants are that way. Like I said, they grow from wherever you traumatize them. But other plants like crypts do not like to be moved, do not like to be traumatized. So if you have any crypts that are under there, get rid of the leaves that are not doing well. Keep the healthy ones, but don't move the crypt. Don't dislodge it or anything. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. And now I've got a big open tank for the angels that I put in here, and this is just floating plants that I need to rehouse into another tank or something like that one that has room still. And again, I have videos on how to cycle out new substrate. If your substrate's real old and dusty, if it all looks like this, then it's time to probably get new substrate and add it. And there's a way to do that. Otherwise, you can spike the ammonia in your tank and crash your whole tank if it all looks like this powder. However, if most of it still looks good, then you're good to go. And usually that'll hold up with the brands like Fluval or ADA or the other big brands out there that are designed for this. They usually hold up 2 to 5 years depending. So I hope this helped, and if you enjoyed it, please give me a little thumbs up and or share it to anybody who you think could use it, and subscribe for more information on plants, animals, and history, all related to aquaria. Have a great day, guys, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.